Sunday, and for that reason,
Mazel tov.
a busy place. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for their good wishes. Okay, let's get to our subject, which is a fascinating analysis of one of the best known and yet most perplexing passages, narratives in the entire Torah. I'm referring to the Chet Mei Meriva, the sin of the waters of contestment or strife. Meriva is strife. And in order to look at it closely together, we need to turn to chapter 20 of Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 20, verses 7 and forward. Actually, I'm sorry, we got to start a bit before that. We need to start really at the beginning of that chapter. Ve-ha-Kabbalah Israel kol ha'idat. So it's on page 842, if you're with me in the stone Chumash. Ve-ha-Kabbalah Israel kol ha'idat midbar tzin b'chodesh harishon v'yeshev am b'kadesh. The people settled in this area, or at least encamped in that area called Kadesh. Vatamas sham Miriam v'tikaver sham. Miriam died and she was buried there. The people, the congregation, did not have water. This is the source of the well-known tradition that the water that they had until then was in the merit of Miriam, the Be'er, the wellspring of Miriam, because when she died, immediately the Torah says they had no water. The implication is that perhaps she was, while she was alive, they had no problem with water, but now they have a shortage of water. Ve'kalu al Moshe val Aharon, and they gathered around Moshe and Aaron. Vayarav ha'ami Moshe, and the people strove with Moshe, I mean, they contested with him. If only we died when our brethren died before God. Quite cynical approach to say, well, we wish we had died. Why do they wish they died? Why did you bring the congregation of God to this wilderness? Lamus Sham, to die there. We and our livestock. Why did you even bring us up out of Egypt? Again, the cynicism and the insolence is quite shocking. Perhaps Moshe was also quite taken aback by it. To bring us to this evil place. It's not a place of agriculture, of planting, of yield, of the field or of the garden. Teina, there's no figs, there's no geffen, there's no grapes, vrimon, pomegranates, nothing like that. You were promising that in the land of Israel. Those are all fruits for which the land of Israel is praised. And the worst of it is there's no water to drink even. So you've taken us to a completely desolate place. There's nothing grows, nothing to eat, and nothing to drink even. We're going to die of thirst. Moshe and Aaron went to the entrance of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. The glory of God appeared to them. This sets the stage for the famous and, as I say, perplexing incident, which, as a result of which Moshe received the most onerous punishment that he was never thinking or expecting. According to the simple pshat, according to the Midrashic tradition, perhaps he had some prior indications of it, but he receives explicitly the news that he's not going to take the people into the land. He's going to die very shortly, even though we have the whole rest of Bamidbar and all of Dvarim to read. But as we'll see later on in this week's Torah reading, Aharon dies within a few verses. His death is narrated. Anyway, let's get to the point. But what we've done until now is important, as we'll soon see. But now we're getting to the punchline. Hashem said to Moshe, take your staff, and gather the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and speak to the rock, in their eyesight, in their vision, meaning publicly. And it shall give forth its water. The rock or the cliff will produce water, the boulder. You will bring forth water from the rock, and you will give water. That is to say, you will provide hydration for the congregation, and their livestock as well. So he did what he was told to do. He took the staff from before God, as he commanded him. And Moshe and Aaron gathered the community, the congregation, opposite this boulder. And he said to them, listen up, you rebels. From this boulder shall we produce water, shall we bring out water for you? He lifted up his hands, and he struck the boulder with his staff twice. And much water came out, and the congregation and their livestock drank. It sounds as if, okay, they had harsh words for Moshe, he had harsh words for them, but actually he delivered the goods, obviously with divine help. And the Torah says explicitly there was water for the people, for their livestock. Sounds like a happy ending to maybe a tense interlude. But as we know, of course, the Torah doesn't validate that way of thinking. On the contrary, Hashem says to Moshe and Aaron, because you did not you did not cause them to believe in me, or you did not believe in me, to sanctify me in their eyesight. You will not take the people into the land of Israel. Okay, I've reviewed familiar verses which are very familiar, but there are a number of nuances which we'd like to highlight, and that's why I think it was important to read those verses, even though we've taken up a few minutes in order to do so. Now, ve-ha-Kabbalah shares with us an approach. Really, there are two approaches which he advances. They are compatible one with the other. I would say these are two separate insights. I find them both fascinating, and I hope you will agree. Chet Meimariva. So the ve-ha-Kabbalah presents an approach which is novel, which is original, and actually he's citing it at length from another commentator that you may or may not have heard of. I don't really have time to tell you too much about him. His name was, he abbreviates him Renu, Reish Nun Vav. His name was Rav Naftali Wiesel. He is known in the literature, the historical literature, as Hartwig Wesley. He was a very learned, very original, modern scholar. He was an associate of Moses Mendelssohn. He was condemned. He was initially respected, but then some of his ideas were condemned by the Noda B'Yehuda and others. And that's why you won't find him quoted very much in the classic traditional Torah literature. But his earlier books were written with approbations from great authorities. The reason they didn't like him, I wasn't going to speak at length, but it's so fascinating, I've just got to share with you. The reason they didn't, the rabbis took a dim view of him is that he responded to the Edict of Tolerance of Franz Joseph II with a response that celebrated the opportunities for secular education and encouraged a kind of revised set of educational principles and educational curriculum in which he essentially endorsed certain types of secular study. And the rabbis, I would say, perspicaciously recognized that such a program was set the stage, unfortunately, for religious reform and catastrophe in the next generation. That's exactly what happened. But nevertheless, ve-ha-Kabbalah quotes him quite a lot, and it's the first time that I've mentioned him, perhaps in our series. But I find this this approach, which is not in any way untraditional, although it is very novel. Let me tell you what he says. He says, Divrei Torah are compared to water. Divrei Torah nimshudu l'mayim, as a pasuk says, Hay kol tzameh l'chu l'mayim. All who are thirsty go to water. It's pasuk in Yeshaya. Torah is compared to water. It's a source of life, etc. The heart, a man's heart, the human heart, is likened to stone. That is to say, a person who is hard-hearted, but it doesn't only mean like he's inflexible or he's harsh or he's unsympathetic or has no compassion, but it means that he is strong-willed, his Yetzer Hara dominates him, and this, my friends, is part of the human condition. Every human being, by the fact that he is human, has a Yetzer Hara, and the Yetzer Hara is a very potent force, a very unrelenting force. In fact, our human circumstances, by which I mean the fact that we are flesh and blood, automatically encourages us and compels us to engage in behavior which takes us away, can take us away, naturally takes us away from spirituality, like eating, drinking, sleeping, other types of physical pleasures, as well as things like pride, like self-centeredness, like greed, like envy. These are all part of the human condition. And therefore, he says, the heart is likened to stone. And the possibility of water, meaning Torah, emerging from the human heart would seem to be very unlikely. He suggests that this is why Hashem caused this miracle to emerge from a rock. And this is very important, it's not the first time, because we have in Beshalach a similar incident, except there it doesn't seem to end in the same catastrophic consequences. I should say, actually, some of the Mepharshim maintain that it was both the same incident, that this incident narrated here is the same event that happened earlier in Parashas Beshalach. But the simple understanding is that that happened at the beginning of the 40 years, and this happened at the end of the 40 years. There were two different incidents. But what's fascinating is that the first time around, Hashem told him to strike the rock. He did strike the rock, and there was water, and that's the end of the story. And it was a very successful outcome. Here, as I'm sure you know, Hashem told him to take the staff and speak to the rock. So the ha-Kabbalah says that the reason Hashem caused the miracle to happen, that water came from a rock, water could have come through a rainfall. Hashem could have brought about a rainfall that would have produced ample water for them in the cisterns or whatever it might be, or they could have found an underground aquifer, or they could have found an oasis. Hashem could have created an oasis miraculously. Now, that would be a supernatural event, but it would be more consistent with what normally happens. If somebody is wandering in the desert, he may discover an oasis. And there are oases in the desert. And again, they may not appear miraculously, but the phenomenon of a wellspring in a desert is something which is part of nature. The phenomenon of water flowing from an arid and parched rock is something extraordinary. Why? Why did Hashem cause it? In order to tell the Jewish people that it's possible for the words of Torah to penetrate the heart. And if you think about it, we have examples of Balei Tshuva, those who were perhaps in the early time of their lives, even growing to maturity, far from religion, far from Jewish practice, even those who may have been exposed to it. I'm thinking of the late Uri Zohar, Rabbi Uri Zohar, who's very much respected by the rabbinic community. But you probably know that until the age of about 38 or 39, he was the leading entertainment television star in Israel. And he was leading the secular life, and he became a Baal Tshuva, a very devoted Baal Tshuva, and a Talmid Chacham as well. He devoted many years to Torah study, and then he devoted his time to outreach. Now, how can it be that Uri Zohar, the entertainer, the television star, living the secular life in Tel Aviv or overlooking the Mediterranean, how can he become a Baal Tshuva? The answer is he can. And the words of Torah have the capacity to, so to speak, transform the heart of so I don't want to say he was a Rasha, but he was a secular Chiloni, not a religious Jew. And I'm sure growing up in Israel in the 1950s and 60s, he must have had plenty of opportunity for exposure to Judaism and Torah thought. He didn't take the opportunity, but eventually he did. I'm thinking of Resh Lakish, the Talmudic sage, who was actually a highwayman. He was a brigand, if you know about his story. But of course, the most famous one of all is Rabbi Akiva. And as you, I'm sure, are aware, Rabbi Akiva's spiritual odyssey began when he observed a waterfall that was cascading onto a boulder. And over the course of the years or the centuries, the water had bored a hole, a declivity in this rock. And Rabbi Akiva thought to himself, if water, which is so insubstantial, can penetrate a rock which is so hard, then truly the words of Torah, which are so potent, can penetrate my heart, which is only flesh and blood. So that metaphor is not quite the same way that we're using it now, but it's a similar idea in which the heart can indeed become receptive to the words of Torah. But the ha-Kabbalah, quoting Rav Naftali Wiesel here, says that the point is that initially Hashem told Moshe to strike the rock, initially meaning when it happened at the beginning of the 40 years. Why? Because at that time, who was he speaking to? They were escaped slaves. They had been suppressed by the Egyptians physically, spiritually for generations. The Jewish people were essentially ground into the earth in a metaphorical way. Their spiritual capacity had become so dulled and so attenuated, as we find that they protest many times, in order to extend or transcend the slave mentality. Initially, Hashem said to Moshe, "You've got to strike the rock," and so he did, because at that time, at the beginning of their, I didn't know they were wandering for 40 years, but when they just left Mitzrayim, so it was necessary to strike the rock in order to symbolize the extreme effort that people who are so spiritually numb, to enable them to appreciate words of Torah, the water symbolizing the words of Torah. But now it's 40 years later. The generation that left Mitzrayim have all passed away, other than those who were quite young. The new generation have been eating the man for 40 years. This is the Dor Deah, the generation of knowledge, of understanding. These are those who were nourished by the spiritual food of the man. This is the people of whom Moshe said, Atem hadvekim b'Hashem chaim kol chamayom. You who cleave to God, you are all alive today. And that generation, Moshe did not need to strike the rock. Moshe was told to speak to the rock, and that was Hashem's intention, that he should speak to the rock. Moshe erred, and he thought that these people were still rebellious, and that's why he struck the rock, because he thought, well, they haven't progressed at all in 40 years, and in that he erred. He did not credit them with improving over the 40 years. Perhaps seeing them, this is my thought, perhaps seeing them day by day meant that he was lost sight of the fact of the improvements that they had made. I would like to suggest a further observation along these lines that is in the spirit of what I learned in yeshiva when I was in Chavetz Chaim yeshiva many years ago, and that is to recognize the gadlus ha'adam, the greatness of man, and how Moshe was, and we'll see this shortly in the second part I want to take up, how Moshe was not just criticized, but Moshe was ultimately punished because he failed to accord the Jewish people the respect and the appreciation. He failed to recognize the greatness latent within them. He failed to appreciate the improvement and the capacity of the Jewish people to respond even just to Moshe speaking to the rock. And this is the reason perhaps that his error was seen as so egregious, so that he was punished in the sense that he was not given the opportunity to complete the task which he had begun. But now I want to share with you a further approach from ha-Kabbalah, in which he analyzes in a very novel way his suggestion of what Moshe did wrong. So it's quite well known that the words Shimu na hamorim, listen up, you rebels, are very forceful, very, you could say, demeaning, very almost like, you could say, angry. And he quotes the Abarbanel, who says that Moshe's chait was gathering the people, shehikilu b'chvod Yisrael, that he demeaned the honor of the Jewish people when he said Shimu na hamorim, listen up, you rebels. Now this is slightly different than what the Rambam says, Ramban has a long, fascinating comment in which he cites the Rambam and other authorities. And the Rambam maintains that the Chet of Moshe was that he got angry. We don't find that Hashem was angry, and the people saw Moshe is angry, God must be angry with us. And we don't find that Hashem was angry. The people complained, the people said we need water, which is a reasonable plaint after all. We don't find that Hashem is angry with them. Hashem tells Moshe what to do to provide water, and Moshe gets angry and says, Shimuna Hamorim, listen up, you rebels. That's what the Rambam says. This is a slightly different approach, though. Abarbanel says, Shimuna Hamorim, he demeaned the Jewish people in referring to them as rebels. He demeaned the honor of the community of the congregation. And that is a form of a Chilul Hashem. This is the Abarbanel, and when we find a similar idea in the Drushas Haran, says ve-ha-Kabbalah, that actually we find something similar in a Medrash as well. But our time is a bit short, so I won't tell you the whole Medrash, but that idea is suggested in a Medrash as well. The Pasuk says in Tehillim chapter 39, verse 12, V'sochachos al avon yasar ta'ish, because he rebuked them for their sin, you, Hashem, punished a man. The man is Moshe. Yisarta, you punished him by depriving him of the role of leader to take them into the land of Israel, and condemned him to perish in the wilderness. And it's because of his rebuke of the sin. He rebuked the Jewish people. Okay, I don't have enough time to do the whole Medrash. That is the approach that ve-ha-Kabbalah quotes in the name of Abarbanel. Then he says that the Mefarshim ta'anu al zeh, im kein lama shana b'chet zeh, if that is true, that Moshe's chet, for which he paid an onerous price, is that he called the Jewish people rebels, Shimuna Hamorim. Why did he say the same thing and even worse later on? Because we find in the book of Devarim, he says the words, Mamrim hayisim im Hashem miyom da'ati eschem. You have been rebellious against God, or you've been rebels before God, or you've rebelled against God from the day I first knew you. Now that is, you could say, a more sweeping condemnation than what he says here. Here he says, Shimuna Hamorim, but there he says, Mamrim hayisim, you have rebelled against God from as long as I've known you. So if that was his great hate, why did he repeat the same thing? Why did he somehow fall into the same error, the same transgression once more? Says ve-ha-Kabbalah, that is the criticism that the Mefarshim advance against the suggestion of Abarbanel, that his sin was in demeaning or somehow insulting, maligning the Jewish people. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah, in my opinion, this criticism is not well placed. Why? And here's his chiddush. He says, if you look closely, Moshe, his error here is that he says Shimuna Hamorim, listen up, you rebels, to the wrong people, because the people who contended with him are the Am. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah, if you look closely, that's why I read it at length. We're going to go back to verse 3, Pasuk Gimel. Look with me in the Hebrew, because I'm not sure if the English translation reflects this. Vayarev ha'am im Moshe, the people. Now the word Am, we have Am Yisrael, but we often find that the word Am hints to the Amei ha'aretz, the rank and file, the masses, the unlearned masses. We find in some cases that ha'am in fact refers to the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude. Now, says ve-ha-Kabbalah, we know that the word Eda, congregation, refers to the worthy members of the community. Eda refers to the Jewish people who are living up to their, or at least sort of consistent with their greatness, their status as the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That is Eda. like it says, Kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim. We find that the word Eda, congregation, refers to the Jewish people who are worthy. The word Am refers to the Amei Haaretz, and even more to the Erev Rav, to the mixed multitude. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah that if we look closely, we'll see that initially the people gathered in Pasuk Beis in verse 2. V'lo haya mayim la'eda. There was no water for the congregation. V'yikahalu al Moshe v'Aaron. They gather around Moshe v'Aaron. Now we assume, myself included, and because that's the simple understanding, that they are like contending with Moshe, they're criticizing Moshe. They're the ones who say the insolent language that we read a few verses later. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah, it's not necessarily the case. They just gathered around Moshe and Aaron. Maybe they said, Moshe and Aaron, please intercede with God on our behalf. We need water. We are at risk of perishing from thirst. Pray to Hashem. Let him bring about that. Hopefully, he will bring about a way that will have water. In other words, v'kalu al Moshe v'Aaron does not by itself connote any kind of spiritual or ethical failing or lapse. Then the next passage says, "Vayarev ha'am im Moshe," who contested with Moshe. Who were the ones who spoke in this aggressive way and insolent way? That's the Am. If only we died. Why did you bring this congregation of God to this wilderness to die, we and our livestock? Why did you bring us up from Egypt, etc., etc.? Now, according to ve-ha-Kabbalah, that is the Am. Now, the problem is that Hashem told him, take the staff, Hakel es ha'eda, gather the congregation, atav Aaron achicha, it says in the next verse, Pasuk Tes, Vayikach Moshe, if you are with me on the stone, you turn the page, Vayakilu Moshe v'Aaron es ha-Kahal. He gathered together the congregation. That is to say, the ones who are the worthy ones are the ones that he gathered. And he addressed them and said, Shimuna Hamorim, etc. So the problem is that Moshe was condemning the ones who did not complain. He condemned the ones who approached him and said, we need water, pray to God. The ones who were presenting that very aggressive and malevolent speech, that was, according to ve-ha-Kabbalah, that was the Erev Rav. So he was indeed guilty of demeaning or even insulting those who are worthy the Eda. Now, I know our time is nearly up, but I want to share with you what he says further that fits in perfectly with the comments of Ramban according to his interpretation. According to ve-ha-Kabbalah, he has a different spin on Ramban. I told you Ramban has the main source. He has a fascinating essay on this subject in which Ramban reviews what Rashi says, what Ibn Ezra says, what the Rambam says. He critiques each of them in turn. Ramban finally agrees with the Rabbeinu Hananel, which maybe we'll do another time. Says Ramban, the chait of Moshe and Aaron were when they said, Hamin hasela hazeh. Will we take forth from this rock? Can we bring forth water? Says Ramban, Chalila, heaven forbid, Shiyah hatema leminiyu, that Moshe is expressing skepticism, or maybe even asking in a kind of rhetorical or sarcastic way. You saying you want water? Can I bring forth water? Can we bring forth water from this rock? Says Ramban, of course, Moshe would not speak that way. Moshe, the faithful servant of God, Moshe, the miracle worker through the instruction of Hashem on so many occasions, besides which Moshe knows that previously, okay, maybe 40 years before, but surely he would remember, they had a similar occasion where Hashem told him to take the staff, to strike the rock, and water came out from the rock. So Moshe is not going to now express extreme skepticism or sarcasm to say this is an absurd request. Can we bring forth water from the rock? That can't be what it means. It says Ramban, what Moshe is saying is it's what the Ramban calls Tamiya hamiskayemes. It is a rhetorical question, but it is upheld, meaning it's not asked sarcastically, but it's a question that's asked in wonderment with the expectation that it can be fulfilled. when he says, will we bring forth water? Or according to Ibn Ezra, that Ramban also quotes, what the meaning is, shall we bring forth water for you or not? Meaning we can, or Hashem may allow it, may bring it about, will he or won't he? In which case Moshe is not expressing doubt or skepticism, and he's certainly not mocking or being sarcastic. He's just saying, let's see whether or not God will bring forth water from this rock. He did it before, that was 40 years ago. Whether he'll do it now, we don't know. Says ha-Kabbalah, both of those approaches are a little bit weak, especially this one that you got to add the words as if Moshe meant to say, will we bring forth water from this rock for you or not? The or not is not in the words. Says ha-Kabbalah, the explanation is as follows. He says, Moshe said, Hamin hasela hazeh notzi, what's the next word? Lachem. Can we bring, meaning will Hashem enable us to bring forth water for people like you? Are you guys deserving of it? You who have so little faith, you who just now said to me, we wish we had stayed in Egypt, we wish you had died earlier, we wish you had never taken us from the land of Mitzrayim. Why did you bring us here to this desolate, abandoned, inhospitable place? People who speak that way, says Ramban, according to ha-Kabbalah, the meaning is, are you guys worthy of it? You're not worthy. That was Moshe's sin. He was not at all skeptical or uncertain whether Hashem could do it, or even whether Hashem was prepared to do it. He wasn't sure, and he's kind of hinting that these guys don't deserve it. Hashem is not going to do it for you because you are of little faith. And according, again, to ha-Kabbalah, this is the distinction in the error of Moshe according to this approach. So just to sum up, and I'm sorry we've gone a little bit over, we've seen here two, I think, original and fascinating, both of them have a limud for us, a kind of Musar insight. The first we said was that Moshe erred in striking the rock like he did the previous time. He had to strike the rock the previous time because they had just left Egypt. He had to be more forceful with the rock in order to follow the symbolism that Hashem can enable a person, or maybe a person himself has the capacity to overcome the heart, which is like a rock, and to produce words of Torah that flow from a person. That's the symbolism. He did not give the Jewish people credit for their improvement in the 40 years, and that's why he struck the rock again. He should have realized now he can speak to the rock, which is what Hashem told him to do. And then we saw just now, Shimona Hamorim, he demeaned the Jewish people. What was his error? Because he didn't realize, he did not take note that the people who were complaining in an insolent way was just the Erev Rav, was the instigation of the Erev Rav. The people themselves, the Jewish people unto themselves, came with a legitimate plea, namely that we're at risk of dying of thirst. If we need water, you must be able to help. But he demeaned them when he said Shimuna Hamorim, describing them as rebels, saying, shall we bring forth water from this rock for you, you ingrates and people of little faith. And again, for us, there's a lesson, I think, for all of us, that we have to have faith in one another, faith in ourselves as well, and to speak always in a way which is respectful, and is particularly respecting the kavod of the Jewish people collectively. I'm sorry I've gone over for a few minutes, but I hope that you'll agree that we have looked at a well-known and perplexing episode from different points of view, and hopefully derive some worthy lessons, extracting living waters from the Torah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. If there are any questions or comments, we're happy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Good Shabbos.
Thank you,
Koach and Mazel Tov.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Those who are local to Golders Green, you're very welcome to join us at the Ufruf. And I do see some names of those who have plans to be with us at the wedding in Manchester on Sunday. So
Manchester.
Yes.
Oh. I'm in Eretz Yisrael, but I am from Manchester.
Oh, I see. I see. Well, good for you. Good for you.
Shabbat Shalom and Mazel
Shabbat
Tov.
shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat
Thank you very
shalom.
much. Shabbat shalom.
Mazel tov.
לכולם. Thank you.
Hala,